what you're doing the whole time in this role is your problem solving. The most important thing I think you can teach young people is this concept of critical thinking and problem solving, because ultimately the world, I believe, unfortunately, is getting much more complicated and complex by the day. Like it just really is. And so how do you peel back the layers and solve for things?
Welcome back to Wild Hearts. I'm your host, Mason Yates, on the investment team at Blackbird Ventures. Stephanie Carullo is an exceptional Aussie with a global career spanning senior operation roles at Apple, IBM, Cisco, and Box. This is a masterclass in how to COO, why a great COO is a startup's chief problem solver, getting into the weeds of a day in the life of a COO for a technology business, driving an efficient model in SaaS businesses, how to measure success, and the importance of tangible and intangible metrics. We also explore a topic close to Stephanie's career, how technology is evolving education, and what we can learn from the iPad and apply those principles to AI. Let's get into the conversation. I would love to get stuck in because I want to become a great COO like you, and there is so much to get through.
Okay.
And I figured we could start with your first day at Apple and just share what that day one experience was like.
The opportunity at the time was really fascinating because when they approached me for the role, they were looking for new leadership to run. At the time, it was the only vertical industry group that they had. And education was always a really special part of the Apple sort of culture and organization, because Steve Jobs truly believed that education was a right and that every human, every child should have the opportunity to learn, and that technology would be this incredible enabler. And so there was always something very special about education. It was always thought of very highly. And at the time when I was approached, they were looking for new leadership, and I did not have an education background. They said to me, we don't actually want someone necessarily with a lot of education experience because we've got thousands of people that understand education. We were looking for transformational change from a leadership perspective. And having gone through that process, they felt that I was going to be a really good leader to help take that group sort of to the next level. So I was surrounded by people who had been in the education industry and sector all of their lives. So on my first day, I remember sort of introducing myself to all these individuals and asking them a little bit about their background. First thing that really strikes you at Apple is people stay for a long time because the culture is so, it just sort of gets into who you are, into the DNA. And they were very, very specialized and deep in knowledge and experience and passion for education. So I remember thinking, wow, these are people that care deeply about what they do. People weren't there for a job. People were there because they felt that they could make a difference in an organization that put education at sort of the center of the universe. And that's what it felt like on day one. There was this incredible just passion for what people were doing. They were changing lives. We have an opportunity to go into the classroom every day and help change the life for one student, and we'll do it one student at a time. And that's what they felt. They truly felt that from day one.
And you said the culture was infused into the DNA. Mm-hmm. Can you share a bit more about how they did that? Like, I'm getting this sense that there's this real education, like speaking with your customer, like experience, but I'm also just curious if we go beyond the first day, maybe first 90 days, what else did you observe about it becoming infused?
For sure. It's really interesting. You were given, as most organizations do today, as part of a sort of a welcome kit. You know, you get a lot of swag, et cetera, et cetera. I think everyone in the tech industry has so much swag stashed away. And interestingly enough, at Apple, you were given sort of this box with sort of a notebook and a card, which I still have. And it talked about having the opportunity to do your life's best work. And they talk about doing your life's best work, and that we really want you to be the very, very best at the role we've hired you to do. And this concept of trust, that what underpins everything that happens in the organization is this trust in each other and in sort of being responsible and accountable and delivering on what the person upstream and downstream of you are expecting and vice versa. So they create these links, these chains, and we're all part of that chain. And you never want to be kind of the link that breaks the chain. And you, Mason, can rely on me and I can rely on you, because we have this bond that says we're going to do our life's best work, and I can't do that if I let you down and vice versa. And it's maniacally and myopically focused on what's ahead of you, like the task at hand. So we knew very clearly what we all needed to go and get done. And so the message and the communication was always very, very clear. And I personally love that. And many of the organizations I've worked for have had leaders that were just very, very good at clearly articulating, this is the challenge or the opportunity that we have today and the road ahead, and this is how we're going to go after it. And I did feel that Apple was exceptionally good at that. And they really did embed that throughout the entire organization, throughout the culture. And I think that's why Apple's been so successful as an organization, because everyone sort of understands what it takes to be successful, and it takes a village, and it's a very, very big village. And you can feel it in the stores. I always sort of, every time I walk to the store, because we're an Apple family, we have Apple technology everywhere.
Who isn't?
And we always did, but who isn't exactly? But the experience of sort of in the store, the minute you walk in, people helping you, and how can I help you? What do you need? The concept of the Genius Bar, the concept of, like, it really is about, we're going to get this done together, and, you know, we are going to help you leverage this and be successful and whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So it really is definitely part of the culture. There's no doubt about it.
Looking outside in, there is the impression that, like, I mean, if you read a biography of Steve Jobs, you'll learn that there was this ruthless attention to high standards. But when I listen to you, the way that it almost feels enforced feels like super high empathy, where it's like, if I let you down, there's just disappointment. It's not anger. That's not the reinforcement mechanism. Can you share a bit more about, like, that correcting mechanism?
Yeah. The organizational design and construct is really important. You know, clarity of strategy, really clear communication, everyone understanding roles and responsibilities, everyone understanding the importance of kind of milestones, course correcting, pivoting when needed, etc. All these, what I would consider to be pretty rudimentary sort of business concepts. Everyone needs to understand that. In every organization I've worked at, you know, I've been super lucky to work really big tech companies like Cisco and IBM and Apple, but then even working at a medium-sized company like Box, where if leadership sets really high standards for everyone, then everyone wants to do their very, very best to help achieve those goals. And as a result, I think you do end up putting a lot of pressure on yourself, because everyone's always striving to do their very best. And I suspect at some point, people also self-select out in organizations like this. May not be for everyone, but if you're lucky enough to really sort of harness the goodness that comes from that, I do feel that it pushes you to be better as an individual, and you take that with you throughout life, both professionally and personally.
Can you share, I've got a follow-up question to this, but can you share a goal that you can remember from your time at Apple, or an objective that you were working towards as a team?
Yeah, so when we were sort of in the thick of it, with the arrival of the iPad really changed what happened in the classroom. It was just this incredible revolutionary tool and enabler for students, you know, either young students or tertiary students as well. And so we had this incredible opportunity, so with this device and then with all of the apps on the App Store, to truly transform the way kids were taught, and so turning education on its head. And I remember at the time we set ourselves some pretty big goals to go after the K through 12 space here in the US. And we had an opportunity because of the iPad and the App Store to do something we had never been able to do before. But going into schools and just seeing how access to this technology across all demographics was just changing the way kids wanted to engage and learn. It was really amazing. I remember visiting a school in Chicago, one of the sort of really difficult, sort of rough, tough parts of Chicago, and seeing 7, 8-year-old kids who didn't even want to go to school, didn't want to be there. Just, it changed their lives, the way they thought about learning and wanting to learn, all because of this device and the technology. We would really feel very emotional about, we have an opportunity to give these kids a chance at life, because education is everything. Without an education, it's really hard to have a rich life. We really set ourselves a goal. We wanted to be the dominant player in the education industry. And whilst I was there, we absolutely did that. We grew at sort of exorbitant rates, and we were penetrating, with these devices in school districts all over the country. And we could see transformational change. Like, we were measuring the things that were happening in the classroom. And we know that these individual devices change people's lives in a very meaningful way. And so when you see it with school children, we made a difference. We know we made a difference in the lives of thousands and thousands of kids. And that's a great thing, to give them a shot at, doing amazing things in life. So, yeah, it's really cool.
I remember I went from chalkboard to iPad.
Yeah.
And I literally remember the day that they handed out the iPads. I mean, at first we were just gaming, and then they caught on.
Which is still okay. The brain's working. No, seriously, we talked about gamifying education, and we spent so much time doing that, because whatever it takes for you to be engaged in the activity of learning, and gamification is one of the best ways to go about it. So it gets the brain thinking. Because remember, critical thinking is really one of the most important skills you can have in life ever. And the ability to make you think through and problem solve is fantastic. And I think gamification is a wonderful way to sort of learn that. So it's probably, it served you well in those early days.
It certainly did. And so as the VP of sales, what were some of the, like you mentioned at the beginning, many of these very specialized roles met with some generalist roles, like you had no background in education, but you found yourself heading up that department. And I guess I'm curious, what were some of the key challenges in particular as it went with aligning teams and like rolling out iPads into schools in the US?
Yeah, so always the hardest thing is adoption for any form of technology in either a work environment, a school environment, or in your personal life. So getting people not only just comfortable using the technology, but at some point it just becomes innate. So just like you and I just pick up a phone and use the phone as if, it's no longer the rotary dial phone. It's exactly the same concept. So how do you go from pen and paper to actually naturally just picking up a tablet or a device and using it? And honestly, students caught on super fast. So they were never really the problem or the challenge. The opportunity really started and ended a lot with teachers and administration understanding the value of it and not taking it and replicating an old way of doing things and just taking a digital device instead of a book and writing on it, but really using it in a fundamentally different way. And so we ended up, once you got through figuring out how you would fund, the technology, which is expensive and a big investment for schools all over the world today. In Australia, my nephews all use technology every day in the school room. And so being able to make sure that everyone has access, so accessibility and making sure that everyone has access is really important. So figuring out all the funding around that, and then making sure you're connected, because that's the other thing, having devices and not being connected to the world at large via the internet. That's the other thing. So really we spent a lot of time making sure that this was a sustainable long-term proposition and not something that they were spending a little bit of money on just getting their hands on a device, but then not really leveraging it in the way that it needed to be done. Then you spent most of your time really re-engineering how they thought about a curriculum. So what does the curriculum look like? How do you teach the curriculum? How do you leverage, the apps and everything that came with the device to actually change the way students learn? Just like you mentioned earlier, this concept of gamification became really big, over the last decade. How do we get people engaged and involved with learning in a way that's suitable for the way you learn, which might be very different to the way I learn? And we then took it a step further as we were selling into sort of universities and colleges around the country. We also spent a lot of time not just selling across all of the faculties, but going into education departments who are sort of teaching the next generation of teachers, saying, hey, we need to rethink the way you're doing this because we want this generation to come out and graduate from college ready to go into the classroom, able to take all this new way of thinking about innovation and technology and embedding that into the everyday life of a student. And we spent a lot of time because the technology in itself doesn't help you unless you know how to use it effectively. And that's really what we spent a lot of time doing. And now you can do really cool things. You embed everything from YouTube and TikTok and everything into classroom curriculums. I mean, kids learn lots and lots of different ways now, which is fantastic. And all of this is enabled because, the world is hyper connected with devices of all, shapes and sizes, enabling you to kind of learn in the way that suits you best.
This is kind of a selfish question, but I'm curious anyway. At least in Australia, the budget cycles are annual. So oftentimes in the education market, the sales cycles tend to be long. You have to get to a key person. Mm-hmm. By the time you're selling that product, you might have a competitor on your heels who's now selling the same thing because basically the sales cycle is a year long and you budget around annual cycles. It also sounds like Apple had breakout growth. And what I'm hearing as well is just this beautiful dance between having obviously an amazing product, but also having the expertise and sales love required to not only sell it into schools, but then to get children adopting it.
Yeah.
The selfish question is, in the US, are the sales cycles similar to the way that I described it? And was that it?
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Was that a constraint that you had to think about building product differently or?
Not building the products differently. So you definitely need to understand your market, regardless of what the industry is and what are the buying cycles. It varied by state as well. So you do need to understand it. And with government and education, there are definitely specific times of the year where budgets are set, budgets are allocated, and then budgets need to be spent by. And you need to understand that whether you're living, in Australia, in Singapore, in the United States. And so we used to call it sort of follow the money trail, but figure out where does it start? How does that process work? Who are the key decision makers and people who need to approve that? And then what does the flow of money look like? And so there was a lot of work that went into understanding how education budgets are funded from a state level. And I know in Australia it was exactly the same, having worked in other tech companies when we were selling into education. You just need to understand the mechanics of this, and then you can try and figure out creative ways to help, schools accomplish all of their objectives or as many of them as possible.
The selfish part of the question is that I'm trying to think through in the back of my mind is sort of how does AI come into the classroom?
Yeah.
And we've seen in vertical cases, you're solving a problem for one user in typically a vertical industry. You save them an hour, save them 2 hours a day, and someone's just paying for it immediately. And you kind of avoid the annual budget cycles is sort of the dream scenario that I'm searching for. I'm not sure that it's there yet, but why do you think it's fascinating in the case of education?
I think AI is going to revolutionize education. There are already so many incredible examples of either existing companies or startups in this space. And then just to give you a really interesting example, Khan Academy, Sal Khan's brilliant organization, and the introduction of AI and an amigo, a friend, as they call it, which is really, it's like having your own personal tutor buddy sort of alongside, and the ability, just having seen what they've been able to accomplish in such a short period of time, and the work that they're doing that is enabling individuals, students of all ages, anywhere in the world, to have this additional support through this, AI assistant, tutor, agent, whatever you want to call it. I love the way that Sal Khan calls it an amigo, like a friend, really sort of a buddy that can help you through working through the problems and asking all the right questions and helping you sort of work through and get to answers is incredible, because a lot of the challenges with just learning, be it in the classroom or even on the job, is the ability to have someone right there to ask a question to. And in the classroom, where a teacher has 22 kids or 20 kids or 25 kids, however many they now have, in some schools higher, how do you get around and help all of us when we have a problem? So imagine if you have a tutor or a buddy that you can access to help you with certain things, and then the teachers can focus on even more specialized work as they're walking around and helping you to really get to sort of, how do I get that critical thinking at the point at which I know you're going to overcome that obstacle. So I do think that AI will absolutely revolutionize things in a really material way.
Without a doubt. One of the really tough parts, I would imagine, of your role during that time, part A, Apple's known for its customer obsession. Part B, you mentioned know your market. Part C being the challenge, which is education's a really tough market in the sense that you have three different really important stakeholders. You've got the teachers, you've got the students, you've got the parents. And then you have all the regulatory bodies and
everything else
who cares about education, which is everyone else.
A lot, yeah.
So when you think about selling to your customer, what was some of the takeaways or learnings on how you danced with that dynamic?
Yeah, I would say that as you approach any engagement or opportunity with the client, and so the client can be a school, it can be a university, it can be a non-for-profit, it can be a small, medium or large enterprise, it can be a government. You really have to understand ultimately what is it that they're trying to accomplish? Like, what's the problem that we're solving for? And how can the technology, be it either physical devices, applications, subscription services, consulting services, whatever that may be, how does that ultimately get you to that outcome as quickly as possible? And they're the sorts of things that you have to be thinking about. Now, in some cases, it gets a little more complicated. And I think education is a really interesting one to highlight, because there are a varied group of stakeholders. So even though you are selling to an entity being a school district or a university, let's say, and ultimately the devices are going to be used by students, teachers, administrators, faculty, there's a third party, a very prominent third party involved here. And that is a parent, because of the nature of the device and what you're doing. And also because education isn't a job per se. So it's not like using a device to accomplish a task that is part of a day-to-day job that I sort of start and finish, let's say, in a work day. Education is, in essence, sort of a lifelong process of learning. And quite frankly, as students, ultimately, education sets the tone for the rest of your life. And so the technology is supposed to be an enabler that's going to allow you to learn and grow and develop in areas that you would not have been able to do without it, let's say, and to enable this in a way that's hopefully faster as well and wider. So it just gives you access to a range of information you've never thought about, or the things that you can learn. And so as you think through this, the third party, the parent, is heavily involved in wanting to understand how the technology is being used, how it's enabling my student to accomplish the goals that will set them up for the rest of their lives, if that makes sense. And so it's a little bit different because the technology is being used not just for learning, but it sort of becomes a part of the student's life. They take it home. They use it for, exploring and discovering things, or for gaming, or for whatever it might be. And so there were a lot more stakeholders involved, and you had to really ensure that you understood the needs of all of the different stakeholders as you brought them on that journey. When you're selling to an enterprise, yes, you will go through a process where groups may test and assess for whenever you're buying a new solution. It has to meet the needs of the organization. And so they're going to be pretty tough on saying yes or no as they go through A/B testing or whatever else. But ultimately, if the decision maker decides, okay, thanks for all your thoughts on this, we're still going to go ahead because we believe this is the right solution, and we're going to roll out a new financial system, whether you like it or not, Mason, you're going to learn how to use it. You don't really get a choice in an organization. We all have to use the technology that we're given and deployed. Whilst in the classroom, in order for this to be effective, everyone needs to buy into the use of the technology. So you had to bring administrators on the journey, teachers on the journey, students on the journey, parents on the journey, lots and lots of different stakeholders, which made selling into this vertical really pretty unique. And I can't think of another vertical that looks like this. I genuinely can't.
No.
Where there is such a diverse group of stakeholders.
I would have said maybe healthcare.
Yeah, maybe healthcare workers have to buy into it as well.
So obviously famous, like Apple's a super famous example, and it's very much spoken about for many of its values, many of its operating principles. What would be some of the learnings from Apple that stood out to you that you would try to bring to me to improve my either clarity of comms or clarity of thought or figuring out what to know?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I was taught this very, very early on, actually in my IBM days. When I joined IBM as a graduate recruit, they were a massive organization back then, 400,000 employees. They and GE had the largest education programs for employees in the world at the time. I always reflect on this, as do many of my friends who all started there. We all started together, and we think about what we learned, the fundamentals of business, which were incredible. It was the best basic business training in the world back then, by far. I remember when engaging with clients to never make assumptions on understanding or knowing something, and always going back to the basics, and always double checking, like at every milestone, to make sure that we were all on the same page and everyone understood exactly what was going on. When you were engaging with a client, you'd always do a recap. So let me make sure, Mason, I understand where we're at. This is where we started. This is sort of what we've discussed. These are things we've agreed upon. This is the next step forward. Am I right in understanding that, Mason? And you would either confirm or not. And you do this every single time. At IBM, they taught you every single time you speak to anyone to ensure that there is perfect harmony and alignment. Let's just make sure we're on the same page, and do that as a practice at all times. And then you get much more natural at it. You embed it in the conversations. And, oh, Mason, it was so great. Last time we chatted, we had this great conversation about this and this. You still feeling good about that. There's so many different ways that you can take such a basic principle and embed that into these dialogues. And as you're working with your team and helping them be successful as they're working, with clients, whoever the client may be it a school district or a large enterprise or whatever else, what is it that we're trying to accomplish again? And so I sit down, I say, so Mason, how are things going? And you say things aren't quite where I was hoping they would be. So, okay, well, let's take a step back again. take me through where, what have we done so far? And you have to continually go back to the fundamentals, go back and you'll find as you go through this is why I always laugh. I think the role of the chief operating officer is really a problem solver. And that's why, and I always loved puzzles all my life. And so maybe I was always meant to be a chief operating officer, or maybe not, I don't know, but all the skills you acquire along the way. And that's because what you're doing the whole time in this role is your problem solving. And you're context switching and problem solving constantly. So that's all you're doing. So this is why I mentioned very at the beginning of the discussion, this concept of the most important thing I think you can teach young people is this concept of critical thinking and problem solving. Because ultimately the world, I believe, unfortunately, is getting much more complicated and complex by the day. Like it just really is. And so how do you peel back the layers and solve for things? And I do think with everything, go back to basics. Be really disciplined. And you'll find as you're working through this, you will identify the missing pieces. And so you're constantly doing this. And this is one of the interesting things about AI. And that is that I think one of the benefits of AI, one of the many, many benefits, but as you're working through some of the tasks, as you're trying to figure things out, it will help you with a lot of the rudimentary tasks that will then give you sort of the obvious answers, or the gaps will become very noticeable. That will allow you to apply your own critical thinking on this. And so it'll hopefully enable you to get to what I think is the fun part, the problem solving and the critical thinking part, that then allows you to sort of think bigger than you ever thought was possible. The role of leadership is going to look really different. So me helping you sort of 10 years ago sort of problem solve and figure out, how do I get to that outcome is now going to be somewhat different with all of this innovation and technology, because you'll still have the leaders and the coaches and the people that will enable you to continue to grow and develop. But you're going to have this capability in the form of, AI agents or assistants or co-pilots or tutors, whatever that is, that's going to help you figure out some stuff that would have taken you time that you would have gotten there eventually on, that allows you to get to the high level thinking. And that's ultimately what you want to do in order to grow and develop, is do the higher level thinking. And that's why I think the two are going to come together in a really sort of beautiful way. It might take some time because people, to your earlier point, we all have to figure out how to use this technology and innovation in a way that assists us to continue to grow, develop. So I do think there's a heck of a lot of sort of training for all of us to understand, how do I really use this in a meaningful way? But we'll get there. Just like, every cycle has always had something new and daunting, and then it became part of our everyday lives. And so I think AI will be the next generation of technology that will incorporate in our lives. It's just going to take us a little while to get comfortable and used to it.
Switching gears to Box, you were there when there are annual revenues of hundreds of millions to then billions. To level set though, like you mentioned that COOs are fundamentally problem solvers, but what was your task as COO? What were your set of responsibilities?
Yeah, so when I went in, the chief operating officer role, particularly in SaaS companies within the tech industry, cover what I would consider all roles that center around the customer. So, we would call them go-to-market functions, but everything revolves around the customer. So selling to a customer, be it directly, indirectly, online, servicing a client, so customer success, so after sales sort of management and support of a client, consulting, technical support, so how do you ensure that they're getting the best out of the technology? And so there's that aspect. Enablement, both for the client as well as our teams, to ensure that they were supporting the clients in the right way. Marketing, so how do we ensure that the message of what we delivered as value got out into the marketplace in the best possible way? So marketing was part of that, enablement, operations. So what are the processes that are required to fundamentally run an organization that can then go out and successfully sell, support, and advance customers? So if you put the customer at the center of that universe, all of those aspects, we used to call it land, adopt, expand, retain. So this sort of cycle of just landing customers, helping them adopt the technology, so driving that adoption, helping them use more of the technology, expanding that, and then retaining the customer, so customer lifetime value for a lifetime. And then you continue that sort of cycle. And the role of the Chief Operating Officer is to coordinate all of those fun pieces to ensure that we have happy customers at the end of the day. So you spend a lot of time out in the marketplace with your teams doing those things. And then you come into the organization and you're sort of I always say, the spokesperson for the customer coming into the organization, working with product and engineering and saying, are we delivering the very best solution? Could we do more with this solution? Have you thought about adding the following? Because we believe the customers will get even more value if we did more. So you spend a lot of time working with product and edge to ensure that they're continually innovating and bringing more life to the platform. I use the term context switching, and we use it a lot. My COO peers and I in the past have spoken about this because you're constantly solving for lots of different things. So a day in the life of is really funny. If I gave you an example of a ridiculous day in the life of a COO, let's say you start the day on a forecast call, very traditional thing that you do in organizations who have sales forces, and so you're on a forecast call. You move from an internal meeting, a forecast call, to a meeting with the client who's looking at making a decision. It may be in a pharmaceutical client looking at using the platform for R&D. So you're talking to the client about use cases, what it might look like, etc. After that meeting, you would then go into a meeting around business operations, looking at analysis. Are we using all of the data in a way that's meaningful? So, for example, looking at particular buys in a particular segment, drivers for making purchases. If we're seeing some churn, why are we seeing churn, doing the analytics around that, and then coming back and looking at more data. You then move to the next meeting, which may have been around enablement. Okay, what are some of the training programs that we think are critically important for our technical support guys and gals in order for them to support the customers? Let's look at the curriculum. I'm still on the same day. This is my 5th meeting. You've just covered like a vast array. And then I'd have a one-on-one with one of my leaders, okay, and I'd work through with them what are some of the things that are top of mind, what's working well, what isn't working well, what's the biggest problem you have right now. Let's just talk through it and see if we can solve some of the things there. And then you'd wrap up. So the day would just go from one extreme to the other. And that's what every single day in the life of a chief operating officer looks like. And then you'd get a problem thrown into the mix 3 times a day. Like there'd be a fire you'd have to put out. There'd be a press release on something that may not have gone your way. and an investor may want to have a meeting to catch up with you. A board member might have a question about something very specific. So that would be sprinkled throughout the day. And that is an ordinary day in the life of a chief operating officer. And so you do spend the entire time critical thinking, problem solving, critical thinking, problem solving. This is what you're doing constantly. So you're looking at the situation, you're trying to get an understanding of the situation from multiple sources. You're then trying to interpret and analyze that. And then you're trying to figure out what we're solving for. And you're working through this constantly. And that's basically what you're doing. And even on your very best day, when everything possibly can go right, you ask yourself, well, hang on a minute. Why did that go right? Like, why did we have such a successful quarter? And you're analyzing, because in order to repeat that, you need to understand what were the drivers for success, just as much as you're looking at, when there's a failure or something didn't turn out the way you wanted it to. So you're constantly learning from both the good and the bad. That's the only way you push yourself to continue to get better and stronger, and so you're just pushing yourself constantly. Yeah. And that's kind of the fun, exciting life of the chief operating officer.
I love the focus of bringing it into a day. Let's keep it there. How would you know whether you're doing a good or bad job?
That is such a great question that I used to ask myself all the time, because the reality is, on the one hand, there are very, very clear metrics. And going back to this concept of clarity, there are very, very clear metrics for most, if not all, of the functions, go-to-market functions from, which the COO sort of oversees. And so you can very quickly determine whether you were successful by looking at, did we hit our financial targets? Did we hit our sales targets, our ARR targets? Did we hit our consulting targets? Did we hit, et cetera, our MPI targets? So you will find that they're very measurable targets for sales, for customer success, for support, for consulting, even for marketing. I mean, you can look at all of the metrics associated with the way people react to campaigns that then become leads that then generate revenue, impressions on a page. Like, there's lots and lots of pure metrics that you can, determine whether you were successful or unsuccessful. And they are very, very important. Don't get me wrong. However, there are so many other things that aren't necessarily as black and white as a pure metric, the intangibles that are really, really important. And so I used to always ask myself, okay, so we hit all the key metrics, let's say. Are our people happy? Is morale good? What does customer satisfaction look like? What does employee satisfaction look like? Are we seeing the levels of engagement that we would want to see with our employee resource groups? Are people attending, Friday lunch? Because it was a big deal. Friday lunch was a company-wide lunch that we did every Friday for an hour. It used to be in person pre-pandemic, and then it went to Zooms. And, if you had, 1,500 employees on a Friday lunch, it's like, well, there's people who are engaged. If you have 150 employees on a Friday lunch, it's like, well, they're not as engaged. So you're looking for a whole bunch of other examples or indicators of whether people are engaged and really want to be there. Because ultimately, I always said, how do you feel on your worst day? So on your worst day, did you want to get up and go to work? And that's kind of, for me, it was always an indicator, because you've got to be realistic. You're not going to enjoy every minute of your career. It just doesn't work that way for a whole bunch of reasons. And that is okay. But at the end of the day, on my worst day, I always wanted to be there in the trenches with these people. And that was one of the things that, I loved about Box. I loved about Apple Education. These were people that wanted to be in the trenches with you, even on your very worst day. And in fact, I think it was even more satisfying on those days where it was hard. But you knew that, Mason was there with you, and we're going to get through it. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to get through there. And we're going to get up tomorrow morning, and we're going to try it again. And that's what made it really worthwhile. And so the metrics are important, but being surrounded by a group of people and individuals who wanted to be there for all the right reasons through the good and the bad times is what made these companies really special. And I think, we created cultures that were super meaningful and really rewarding. And, I felt that, the whole time I was at Box, even on our hardest days, I didn't want to be anywhere else. And in Apple Education, we didn't win every school district in the country. And when we lost some of the tough ones that we really wanted to, and we thought we had the very best solution for these kids, it was heartbreaking. It's like and we'd go back at it. The next time that contract was up, we were going to go back at it again. And we learnt from the mistakes and what could we have done differently. And in some cases, there isn't anything you can do differently, by the way. Circumstances don't necessarily just play out that way. But you don't give up and you try again when the time comes. And I do think that that's the intangibles are just as important as the metrics. And so I'd ask myself those questions like, was it a good day today? And often I would reflect on it and also always look for the good things, because even on those tough days, there's always going to be a highlight or two on those tough days. Individuals that did amazing things or said the right things, or lots of examples of it. But I think as a leader, especially, you definitely want to be asking yourself, what are the things that are important? What defines us as a great organization, a great company? One of the things I also always looked for is unsolicited feedback from clients who said, your team made the difference. You weren't the cheapest, but you were the right solution for us. And we love the fact that you had our back the whole time. So there's lots of things that would determine whether you were winning in the broader sense of the word.
You were involved at Box during one of the most fascinating periods for SaaS. The sky high valuations and then the demise of those. At the same time, I remember even at Blackbird, I think in my application, I was looking at Box and I had to do a little write-up. And I remember gross margin being a really critical part that started low and made its way high, as I'm sure was a key focus as you thought about how do we drive better margins. But at the same time, in that frothy market, you've got the pressure to grow like crazy. And I'm just curious, what were some of the trade-offs? What were some of the practices that you went through during that period?
Yeah, it's interesting because what you're trying to do is grow a bunch of different metrics, if that makes sense. So obviously there's this focus on top line growth as well as keeping an eye on the bottom line at the same time. And then in SaaS, it's also about customers and customer acquisition, because if you think about it, data is king ultimately. So your platforms become richer and richer with more and more data. And that's how SaaS models work. And so you want to have in order to have very rich platforms with rich data, you need a lot of customers. And so everyone's always vying for customers and thinking about a customer acquisition strategy and how do you keep those costs down so you can continue to acquire more customers as you drive, a profitable business model. And so you're, on the one hand, looking at spending money in order to acquire more customers, because you have to feed the marketing engine, you have to feed the sort of selling engine, both direct and indirect, and online, so the omnichannel. So you're constantly having to feed the engine in order to acquire the customers, in order to grow the ARR, so the recurring revenue streams. At the same time, though, you need to do this whilst driving an incredibly efficient operating model. And so how do you do this and sort of balance the cost model? And I think in the startup phase of these SaaS companies, it's sort of hell for leather, because you really are trying to get as many customers as you can, grow the ARR. And so you have to feed it. As you're getting better at sort of growing that, then you're looking at the operating model. And when I came in, that was a really big part of my job. And I think for most chief operating officers is how do you drive the most efficient operating model that allows you to continue to grow the top line, but really manage your expenses. And we spent a lot of time looking at how do we save money in the most appropriate ways. And so you're constantly revisiting your processes. You're constantly revisiting the technology stack. Do we have the right tools? Is there a better way of leveraging a subset of these tools? Do we need all of these tools? Are they in fact causing more chaos by having a bigger technology stack? Have we got the right tool? Can we find a tool that could do 3 things instead of having 3 separate platforms, etc.? So you're constantly thinking about ways to drive a more efficient operating model, because you never want to compromise on what you're doing with the customer, be it either a customer that you have today or a future customer. So you want to continue to add as much value as possible in that upfront model. But in order to accomplish that, I need to have the most efficient back end. And so you are always looking at ways to improve that. So I would say I probably spent 30 to 40% of my time looking at driving improvements around the processes and the frameworks, the technology stack, the organizational design. Really great example. Probably 15 years ago, the hot thing in technology companies, SaaS and just broad-based technology companies, were having a lot of specialist teams. So we'll have an overlay team, a specialist team. So if you were selling, let's say you were selling 5 products and you really wanted to sell 2 of these new, shiny new toys, products, you would create a specialist team that would work with the sales team as an overlay team, because we all felt back then that you had an opportunity to get to market faster and to accelerate a sales cycle by having a specialist person working alongside. On the one hand, there's a lot of truth to that. The flip side of it is you've just doubled your cost and possibly tripled it, because you've now got more people involved in the sale. And by the way, if you are successful, you then have to pay more people commission. And there may even be another third party on indirect channel involved in all of this. So all of a sudden, the costs would blow out. And so then it became, we sort of all scratched our heads and thought, well, hang on a minute. Is it really that complicated to sell all these products? Why can't we just train our sellers to be able to do this? Oh, let's go a step further. Possibly the customer can educate themselves and they can decide what they want and they can buy without anyone assisting them. And so then you've got the omni-channels, etc. And so we've evolved our way of thinking around what was a very top-heavy, human-oriented way of engaging, all the way through to a transaction that doesn't require any involvement from anyone other than access to a platform. And with subscription sales, absolutely, in a subscription model, I need more seats, I'm going to buy more seats kind of concept. So you've sort of got both ends of the spectrum, and what you're trying to do is drive efficiencies and continue to evolve your platform, products or services in a way that allows you to get tremendous value and therefore charge a premium and charge for that value without all of the costs associated with that transaction flow. And so I think particularly over the last 7 years, that has evolved and really accelerated in a way that I don't think any of us would have thought. And I do believe moving forward, as the platforms become even more sophisticated, that traditional way of engaging with clients is going to look very different. Just like you and I today do a lot of self-serve. Like this concept of clarity, I know what I want, as long as you as the vendor, whatever that may be, is selling me exactly what I want, then why can't I buy it? I don't know if you heard that today. You can now purchase a car on Amazon. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
And so there's a few interesting articles out today. You should have a look at it. But again, let's just think about this. If I know exactly what I want to purchase, why can't I do this transaction seamlessly, leveraging the technology to do so? You should be able to do this. So I do think that things have evolved very quickly. So I think that the role of the chief operating officer moving forward probably changes pretty dramatically, as well as you start to leverage the tools and the platforms far more in terms of getting you a lot of the answers that we would have spent a long time sitting around the room analyzing data together for a long time. And now you could ask an AI tool, run a query leveraging AI, and 3 months worth of work will have been analyzed for you very quickly. And so now, going back to my point around critical thinking and high level thinking, how do I take what I now have as information that took me half an hour to get, which in maybe 3 years ago would have taken a team of people 3 months to get to that. Now that I have this information, what do we do with it? And so this is where that high level thinking comes into play. How do I use this in a way that benefits my organization and my clients? And that's why I think, it gets to be, I think, a lot more interesting and fun being in the business world, because you have access to a lot more valuable information that you can now do something with that would have taken you donkey's years to figure out.
I love that example. It's like beautifully closes the loop on a chief operating officer being a chief problem solver.
Yeah.
How did you align incentives between teams?
Incentives really are very, very important because ultimately it's what motivates people. It's what drives people, and understanding what those drivers are is really, really important. And for a sales organization, it's always, for the most part, as a general statement, it's financial incentives. Now, I would argue that applies to other organizations as well, not just sales, but customer success. So these teams want to be recognized for the work that they do in developing customers and growing customers, etc. But, for product teams as well, the incentives may be very different. Like bringing an incredible product to market where you get incredible adoption. Often, if you ask a product marketing person what the most important incentive for them is and what drives them, is seeing their product used, without a doubt. It's like the adoption, knowing that we built something that inspires people. And actually, Apple's a great example of this. When we developed a fantastic product that went to market, and if we brought a VP of product into a customer call with an education person, them listening to a student or faculty or administrators talking about how life-changing the technology was for them was like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It was the most important thing. It made it all worthwhile. And I think true product managers will tell you that having something they created being used every day, day in, day out, is incredibly rewarding and motivating for them. And so I think with incentives, understanding the drivers, what motivates people, and ultimately determining that. And once you figure that out, particularly when you've got teams from all different functions working together and putting that in place, I think is really important. The other thing is I've always been a really big believer in everyone having a stake in it. And so as a leader, for example, I'm the type of leader that believes that we all should be incentivized on each other's metrics. So I am more than happy to take the metrics of a product leader, a chief product officer, and a head of engineering if they're prepared to take my metrics, because it shows that we're all in this together. Sign me up, I always said. I will take your metrics any day of the week, because I want you to know that I believe deeply in the work you're doing in developing that product, and whatever we need to do to help you get that product into the hands of my customers, we will do. You have my word. And not only do you have my word, we'll put money where our mouths are and actually, have the same financial incentives. I'm a big believer of leadership teams across all functions having intertwined metrics and incentives, because it means we all care about it. We all have a skin in the game ultimately. And so I think when you've got disparate teams working together on the same objectives, you want to make sure that there are at least a small subset of metrics that everyone interlocks on together. Like we're gonna do this together, and everyone reaps the same benefits. So if we are successful, we all get the same benefit for this subset of metrics. I think it's really, really important. And that work has to be done really thoughtfully for you to get, I think, successful outcomes and really successful teams.
I'm going to finish with a really cringy question, but this conversation has just been so rich, and I'm just curious what your answer is, despite its cringiness, which is what's been the best career advice that you've received, or like what would you like to impart on aspiring COOs or founders listening in on what they should look for in a COO who can grow into that potential that they can sort of lean on?
I'm going to answer it two ways. The first one is, so one of the most impressionable leaders that I've ever worked for and most brilliant human beings is an Australian gentleman, David Thodey, very well known. He was a senior executive at IBM for many years. He was the CEO at Telstra, he's been chairman of CSIRO, very prominent person in the Australian market and industry and doing incredible work. And I had the good fortune of working for him for many years. He treated everyone with the same level of respect and importance. Everyone from the cleaner in the building to the CEO of the ANZ Bank was treated with the same level of respect and humanity and grace. And he never forgot a name. He was always very thoughtful. There were just so many incredible things. The other thing he always made really clear was the small things matter, the little things count. And I'll give you an example. My entire life, if anyone ever sends me an email or a text or a message, I will always, always respond to anything and everything. And I will always address it with your name, always. Even if you've sent me a very quick email with one sentence saying, action was completed, I will come back and say, thanks so much, Mason. Have a great day. Always, always. I will always send a thank you to a client. I will always, even as a chief operating officer, I probably got minutes to clients before my teams did, which horrified them at times. I was so quick. And the fact that I even did thank you emails to every client I ever met in 35 years. And that's because the little things count. I remember in the early days, very early days, we're talking mainframe, so I'm showing my age, there was a massive client in Australia and we were doing a huge job overnight. And I remember rocking up with pizzas and donuts at 3:00 in the morning on site. And they were just blown away that someone would show up at 3:00 in the morning to a client site with these engineers sort of doing stuff. And David always said, it matters. The little things count. The details count. And I always took that with me through my entire career. And people have commented on that over the years. People have said, I can't believe as the chief operating officer, you send thank you notes out to every client. And I do it within 24 hours. And I always say, well, they've taken the time to have a conversation with me. They took time out of their day, 30 minutes or an hour. The least I can do is tell them how much I appreciate it. So I think that was something that stayed with me my entire life since my early 20s. And I've never forgotten that. And then as a chief operating officer, and a lot of people always ask me because I will say it's the most fun job in the world. And it really is. It's probably not for the faint-hearted. And I think it's because you probably need to like a crisis and never waste a good crisis. But I think that I really liked to work under pressure and I thrive under pressure. And my boss and founder of Box, Aaron, used to always say that I did like to work in really tough conditions and under, and in a crisis situation. And I think you probably need to have a little bit of that resiliency and grittiness as a chief operating officer. And I think the ability to context switch a lot because the job is it's a very vast job because it covers so many different functions in the organization and sort of just a vast array of topics. You need to be able to absorb things very quickly and move from one topic to the next and be like fully present and thinking through things, asking questions, getting to the heart of the matter. I do think this desire to constantly be curious, and that's what I think Steve Jobs talked about being curious as one of the things that was really important. You're never, ever going to solve for everything, and you're never going to tick every box. And your work is never done. It's never done. So you have to be someone that likes to keep pushing and keep going. If you do like this, I think this is a fantastic job for you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. That was so much fun. Yeah.
I learned so much.
Oh,
I am
appreciate it.
Super appreciative.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. You're very, very welcome. And it's funny, people always said to me, why did you get into tech? And I said, I got into tech because it was all about problem solving. And if I had the opportunity to work with individuals or organizations where together we could solve for something and get to a better place, then what more do you want from a job at the end of the day? And the tech industry really afforded me that, and afforded many of my friends and peers that. And I think it's probably the best business education in the world, really. If anyone, out there thinking about it, I just don't think you can go wrong. I think you can help solve some really big problems, and we know the world needs some help right now, and you have an opportunity to do that in this industry. So it's a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Thank you so much for, again, your time and for sharing the wisdom.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us on this latest episode of Wild Hearts. If you want to learn from other ambitious people that are building, designing, and creating the world that we want to live in, then please hit the follow or subscribe button. It would mean the world to us here on the Wild Hearts team. We have an insane producer, Melia Rayner, an incredible editor, Andy Jones from Welcome to Day One, and our marketing and content support is provided by Jonathan Bleakley, and we couldn't do it without them. If you're searching for investment, please, my DMs are open. Find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to help. And so with that, we'll see you next week, Wild Hearts.